Yo guys, it's your homie Zeno Payne. I'd like to welcome y'all to another Black Desert Online video for the Xbox One, and today we're going to be going over the lore for the Dark Knight's Awakening. So I hope you guys enjoy this, as this is my first time doing lore on this channel. Other than that, let's go and bounce right into it. I'd like to welcome you guys to the history of Vadir. In primordial times, before history was recorded, the holy tree stood, rooted in the highest place of the forest. Kamasylvia descended together with spirits of nature and named the almighty tree Kamasylvia. The energy of the sun and moon gave birth to Ganel and Vadir, who received the blessing of Kamasylvia. While nurturing her children, the goddess ascended back into the sky, after sealing her will to Kamasylvia, the sacred tree. Ganel and Vadir, who had been left behind, settled down under the blessings of the sacred tree and prospered in its place. The first catastrophe to strike the thriving Kamasylvia was a strike of dark spirits in the depth of the mountains near the Kabuya tribe. Sylvia's descendants did not have enough power to protect themselves. Instead, they relied heavily on the sacred tree's power. Ganel and Vadir continued to draw power from the Kamasylvia tree to purify the dark spirits, but they were no longer able to overcome the ever-growing darkness and sought out a greater power. Vadir insisted on burning all of the life energy of the Kamasylvia tree just to maximize their strength. They succeeded in amassing the power, and it was in fact strong enough to drive out the entirety of the darkness. And so the war with the dark spirits came to a conclusion, but all moaned in great sorrow when Kamasylvia fell into a deep sleep afterwards. No longer could the energy and the life in the womb of the goddess be felt. The descendants of Sylvia, who had sensed the danger, decided to imbue power from the spirits of nature into an old Kamasylvia tree branch and forge it into a sword, naming it the Kamasylvian sword, and taught each other how to handle it. This is where the conflict between Ganel and Vadir began. The descendants of Sylvia divided themselves into 4 factions because they were just mad at each other over the utility and symbolism of the Kamasylvian sword. Archers was the first of the 4 factions to form. Archers have devoted themselves to the absolutes of law and order. Rangers were the second faction to be established by those that accepted the consciousness of Kamasylvia, in which history and progress coexist. The third faction, none other than the Dark Knights, which was founded by Vadir herself along with her followers, had the same concept the Rangers had. They accepted the consciousness of the Kamasylvia, but employed a different method of controlling nature's power. The Dark Knights went on to be stricken by a coup, out of which formed a breakaway faction led by distinct Vadirs. Those who broke off were called the Ahibs, which is the 4th faction, who pinned for the power of darkness. Failing to see eye to eye, the descendants of Sylvia suffered an internal conflict leading to long wars. Hence a cold war broke out amongst them. This was when the Ahibs fled to the arid lands of peace, seemed to have been momentarily restored. The source of power at the hands of the Dark Knights was different from those of the Archer and Rangers. The power which once burned the energy of Kamasylvia was inclined to destroy nature. Such dark powers could never be accepted in the sanctified Kamasylvia. In the end, the Dark Knight left Kamasylvia of their own accord to avoid conflict. They all disappeared and have not been seen since. I'd like to welcome you guys to part 2, Dark Knight rules over the origin of the infinite power. They refused to fall in line. They only halted years of wandering when they arrived in a barren wasteland, considering themselves to be noble guardians of their homeland and proud descendants of the goddess. They dreamt of returning home one day. Thus there wasn't a day that went by without training, as they awaited their return to Kamasylvia as the rightful guardians. One day the little girl awoke from her sleep, sweaty and exhausted. Nightmares kept haunting her. The image of a gigantic swaying tree was lodged in her mind. The tree seemed to be screaming in pain, while ablaze with fire, a destructive force powerful enough to scorch the life out of the land. When the fires had swept over the 4 corners of the world, there was a figure who stood before her and looked down. The little girl tried to get a better look at her mysterious tormentor, only for him to vanish from her mind's eye. When she finally came to, she told her visions to her sister. They could no longer keep ignoring her prophetic dreams. They simply had to prepare for the worst to come, yet another catastrophe. They would have to send a delegation to the Kamasylvia Council. The sisters tried to come up with a way to do this, but even recently, the Ganal, who had been in conflict with the Ahib, gave them the cold shoulder. Over the years, Kamasylvia seemed to be recovering its normal state, but the rift between the Vidir and the Ganal did not seem to be healing. The little girl insisted someone had to prevent the calamity, but she knew all too well that this was far away from the Kamasylv. She could not use the powers of spirits of nature to the fullest. She reminded herself of the terrifying presence that felt so real in her nightmare. To defeat it, she just needed more power. There were many who opposed her. She was criticized for risking the very fate of the land. Her opponents called for more conservative techniques to amplify, yet delicately, control the energy of nature while sticking with tried and tested methods. Before the catastrophe had even struck, it seemed the various factions were more divided than ever. Rumors traveled fast, and a few Vidir from the land of the Thornbush came to visit the little girl. They were the Ahib, who claimed to have obtained much greater power, which proved to be true. They had changed so much that they were no longer recognizable as their sisters. These Ahib had accepted the powers of the black spirits that had once tried to take over their homes. According to the Ahib, the energy of the black spirit was a bottomless wellspring, but something was strange in their demeanor. It seemed as if they were not acting on their own will, but controlled by a great power. The powers of the Dark Knight Vidir, to be exact, resembled that of the black spirit. As the Vidir overreached and took the energy of the spirits, the black spirit fed off and controlled their minds. Some would go insane as they were completely possessed by the black spirits. Those who gave in to the overwhelming powers of darkness shook in pain or would attack anything in sight. Even those who survived the madness seemed to have lost their will and ability to think on their own. Their eyes were glazed over with desire and murderous intent. Fortunately, not all efforts were in vain. The new experimental Verdient's weapon allowed delicate control of the energy of the black spirit, and this weapon was the most effective against those who were corrupted by the black spirit. The little girl still struggling against the corrupting influence of the black spirit, and if she were to be overwhelmed by the dark power, everything would be lost. She could not lower her guard. The black spirit would try to seduce her, then strike and utterly consume her should she falter for just a moment. Time had flown by. Maybe the land had already turned to ashes and ruin. The little girl had finally found the root of the black spirit. In its deepest and darkest reaches, there she would meet a dark reflection of herself, a dark test to prove herself worthy. When the black figure reached out its hand, it vanished like dust in the wind, and the little girl could feel something in her hand. On that day, a ray of light shone across the horizon of that desolate land, breaking through the darkness as if a second sun had risen. When she opened her eyes, the little girl could not remember her ordeal in the deepest root of the black spirit. The only thing she could recollect was the catastrophe was on its way. Resolute, she whispered, I must protect Kamasylvia. Other than that, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys did, don't forget to smash that like button for more Black Desert Online content for the Xbox One and gaming content in general. Don't forget to subscribe, especially if you're new here. Other than that, your homie Xenopain out. Peace.